Hello, welcome to the overview of the Business Advisory Services Starter Package produced by ESS BIZTOOLS. I'm Peter Towers, Managing Director and Founder of ESS BIZTOOLS. In this webinar today, we're going to give you an introduction to the Research and Development Introduction Package that is incorporated within the Advisory Intro and Starter Packages developed by ESS BIZTOOLS. So what I'm going to do is to bring up the ESS BIZTOOLS website. That's now on your screen, and we are looking for the starter package. So we go to the starter package and click on there, and that will give us access to the material that's within the packages that were in the starter package. And we're looking for the Research and Development Introduction. So we click on that. You've got a summary there, which is giving a brief overview of the Research and Development Starter Package. This is an introduction for you to look at. And I designed it so that you could answer a question from your client. I overheard one of my competitors talking in a club the other night that he'd secured a research and development grant. How would he have got that grant? If he can get a grant like that, so can I. Or words to that effect. We've all heard those sort of comments from clients about all sorts of things over the years. Well, research and development is no different, because thousands of SMEs around Australia are taking advantage of the research and development assistance that this legislation supplies. And research and development is embedded within the Taxation Act. So this is all governed by the Taxation Act, because it's all taxation benefits that have been given for research and development to be established. Oz Industries, the specialist government department that looks at a whole range of innovative activities, grants and other aspects, is also involved in this process as to whether it is a legitimate research and development activity. Tax officers worried about, first of all, the approval from Oz Industry that project appears to be properly constructed and it's realistic research and development activity, and the tax office then looks at the amount of money involved and what's being claimed. In your initial inquiries from a client, you might be answering how the business operates. You might indicate to your client, well, if you want to claim research and development, you have to be a company. You're currently a sole trader. The company then has to expend at least $20,000 on legitimate research and development activity in the financial year that the claim is being made for. And there are set processes and information that needs to be supplied. What we have done within ESS BIZTOOLS is develop product packages to take you right through the whole journey. In total, there's 46 forms in the total package. There are 13 flowcharts. There are 13 papers whereby we've dissected the whole research and development story into 13 compartments to make it easier to read. So we're going to be looking at the first part today, which is really answering that initial inquiry and traces through what needs to be done if a company wishes to formalise that it wishes to start a research and development project. So we're now going to download the content. And the first form we have is a procedure control form. This is a document which has to be transferred from here and we now have it. So it's on your website now, the procedure control form. We've got a procedure control form for each of the packages within ESS BizTools to guide you through the process. I would suggest that you read this so that you're very familiar with the overall processes, and it will give you a good introduction to this process if you can read that and then try to implement it. We've then got various forms, BAS, Business Advisory Services, and then the form number. There's 9 of them within this particular package out of the 46 that are in the total system. And then we have one flow chart, and there's another 12 in the total package. And we've got 3 of the papers, and in total, there's 13 papers that are utilised to explain the research and development story. So I now want to bring up the planning a research and development project, which is the flow chart. So there might be a discussion between the company leadership and some of the team members. Someone may have come up with an idea. Now that could have been a first-year apprentice. It could have been a 60-year-old veteran of the organisation. Just sat down and had a bit of a yarn with a few people, talked to the foreman, talked to the manager. Why don't we do such and such? And then the manager could say, okay, we'll document that. We'll write out what we're trying to do. That's a project where we're going to try to prove or disprove the idea that's been developed on the factory floor. And the manager might say, I'm going to create a small team. Might be 2 or 3 people, might be the small team. And he may say, well, over the next 2 weeks, I'll allocate that you can spend 30 hours each working on this project. So there's 90 hours being invested to undertake some initial research. Those people would then move into undertaking preliminary investigations. They should create a file name. What are we calling this project at this stage? Mightn't be the final name, but at least they get started. And why do we think this will be something that's unique? Why is it different to anything else that they're currently using in their day-to-day work? Because presumably that's where the ideas come from. And could this be something that's of value? Could it save a lot of time and therefore money within the factory? Is it something that products could be developed from to be sold? Or could the technology be sold off to someone else? So at this stage, it's important that everyone understands the research and development eligibility rules. So we'll have a look at them. They're paper 052005. So I've brought across the paper, research and development eligibility. And you could badge this paper with your firm name, take off ESS BizTools and send it out to your clients. So what this is giving you is immediate access to determine what's the eligibility. Now, I've partly told you this. It's that the entity has to be a company and has to spend at least $20,000 in the financial year. This paper's very quickly got into the key components of the tax incentive. For companies with turnovers under $20 million, it's a refundable research and development tax offset, which is calculated at the corporate tax rate plus 18.5%. So at present, the corporate tax rate for companies with turnovers under $20 million is 25% plus the 18.5%. So the total rebate will be 43.5% of the eligible research and development expenditure. For companies with turnovers over $20 million, it's a bit more complicated. we have a system whereby that their research and development intensity is measured. So if less than 2% of the total expenditure of the company in the financial year is 2% is the research and development component of that total expenditure, the premium is 8.5% on top of the corporate tax rate. So if the corporate tax rate was 30% plus 8.5, so the taxation calculations have been done at 38.5%. If, however, the research and development intensity, that's the expenditure on research and development, legitimate research and development that's going to be claimed as such in the company's taxation return, if that expenditure exceeds 2% of the total expenditure in the year by the company, the premium is 16.5%. So if a company's tax rate is 30% plus 16.5%, we've got 46.5% as the calculation. The system here has some notes then on the eligible companies and discussion on groups and professional advice. So that's a very straightforward, simple paper that's got a lot of information in it to assist you to communicate that to your client. So that's so at this stage, we've got a box here. Do you wish to proceed? Because it may have all got too complicated for your client. Now, I assume they've taken it back to their management person and said, well, we can't document what we're doing. It's all too early, whatever. But on the basis we're going to proceed, which is how I'm going to present this presentation to you, what would probably happen then is management's had a look at this now and said, yeah, okay, based on the preliminary work the people have done, we might need a project coordinator for this. And then we need to start getting serious because we need to look at prior art searches. So let's go to BAS 5505. This is a form which could be badged with the client's name, company name. So we've got the company name, the project number. It's good, I said at the very beginning, we need to have reference details on these things. So we've got a number and a title and what's the purpose and when would it start and who's the project leader and what's the idea right there and what's the objectives of the project. We've got a project number and who was on that original small team. It's very important that there's a history kept on every project that's going to be claimed as being legitimate research and development. And what was the result of the preliminary investigations? Because if there's going to be a decision to go forward on this, they must have been favourable, those results. So make the note, what were they? Who's the project leader? Now, then we need to undertake some prior art searches. So we give an answer as to what they are. Now, prior art is seeing that somewhere in the world, someone hasn't already obtained a patent on the concept that your client's looking at. How do you search them? Well, you search on the internet to see if there's documentation relating to that type of claim that may have been made. You talk to consultants or university team members, and they can do research. You can go and talk to a patent attorney. It's not something that's just sitting on a shelf somewhere. You have to take some time and go out and do it. So many people develop a brief at this stage. This is what we're trying to achieve. And they get a professional like a patent attorney, and they will conduct a search of the major registers, which are the USA and the European registers, and in Australia, to see whether someone's already registered something like this. So then we're going to define what was the outcome of those prior art searches. And I'm going to leave the paper there because I want to go back to the material. So we've done that. We've had a look at prior art and we're fairly confident to continue to proceed. So we've got the documentation of the prior art identified. Incidentally, can you please tell your clients that if they're doing their own initial prior art searches and they're finding information on the internet, they should print that off and make sure that the date that they got that information either appears in the article or they date stamp the article. Because if there's a dispute with Oz Industry or the Taxation Office later on as to what information was discovered on a certain date relative to prior art, it's important that your clients kept that documentation. And if it's not dated in the original printout, that date's put on it and signed. This is the date we got this document. Because it is feasible that a few months after your client has done their review, their research, and they've decided that they can go ahead and spend 40,000, 50,000, maybe 200,000 on this project, that someone else a few months later may in fact have registered a patent, so that when the company puts in its claim to claim the expenditure that the company's made under the research and development tax rebate, the fact that someone else has already patented this process could come to light because Oz Industry does research. But if your client is able to produce the documentation that at a certain date, when they did their research, they couldn't find that anyone had obtained a patent or documentation, you're putting your client in a far better position to be able to still claim this expenditure. At this stage, some businesses appoint a research and development manager, or if they've got a manager, that person gets involved in the process. It's very important then that the core activities are identified, because what the team has got at this stage is an idea. So what's the core activity? What's the main thing that they're wanting to achieve from undertaking some research? You know, the business is going to allocate that they can spend 400 or 500 hours on undertaking the research, documenting, etc. At this early stage, they need to have developed a consensus as to what that research is going to be targeting. What are we trying to prove? We'll get a bit more technical in a moment, but you know, what's the process? And these core activities are very important. What's very important? Some of the other things you do in research and development are not as important. The core activity, if it can't do this, it's not worth worrying about. That's the core activity. And there must be at least one in every project. There can be more, but there must be at least one. This is what we've got to develop a winner out of. If that can't work, we'll forget the rest. That's just little fringe benefit type things that come along. And as part of this, there needs to be some reflection as to what the new knowledge might be. What are we hoping to achieve out of all this? What new knowledge? And the outcome cannot be known or determined in advance on the basis of current knowledge, information, or experience, but can only be determined by applying a systematic progression of work. So the outcome you're looking for is not something you already know the answer to. We've got to get to the outcome by undertaking this systematic progression of work. In other words, experimentation, recording the experiment, analysing it, deciding where some subtle changes are going to be made, and go back into the factory, the workshop, the office tomorrow morning and do the next round of experiments. And part of this is this concept of a hypothesis. Now, a hypothesis is setting out to prove something one way or the other. And there's no right answer on this, because in actual practice, the hypothesis might not be correct. But as long as your client has kept the documentation and worked through this flow of information that I'm referring to, the expenditure up to the stage where there's a decision that it's not feasible, it's not going to work, is still claimable under the Income Tax Act. At the very beginning, I said, make sure there's a record kept of who was in the original small team. And then there's also the necessity to record who has been consulted on this project, which other professionals or tradespeople or whoever has been consulted. It's a good idea to get confidentiality agreements signed by these people. Some people will not sign them. And this action of trying to get confidentiality agreements finalised should be a process that's commenced very early in this whole sequence of events, so that people working on it know that that's how this company does business. The confidentiality agreements need to be signed. And as part of this record keeping, recording the advice that's been received from other experts. What have they said about this? Do they think that your client's onto something, that this could be a great new product? And what other material has been identified from other sources? And then it's about a time to sit down and do some review. I assume the 90-odd hours that might have been allocated by the manager has now been used up. So it's time for decisions. There's some history now put together. The team that had undertaken this made some inquiries of the accountant, or maybe the accountants rang the external accounting firm that looks after their taxation services, and it's discovered, yes, the company could claim research and development if it was all set up properly. So the review is really to say, well, are we going to go ahead with this? Are we going to be putting a submission to the board of directors? And there's some checklists there. And I think it's a good idea to produce a plan. This is how we're going to go about this. Some of the forms will assist in this. We need to undertake research activities. This is how often we will be undertaking them. And we will keep a record of the tests that are conducted on the concept that's been researched to make sure that the benefits are noted. So the development plan is important, although I should stress that under the legislation, a development plan is not required for a company with a turnover less than $20 million. But I suggest to you that it is very desirable from a management point of view, because there's been some planning. Because in that plan, someone may have done some calculations and say, gee, on the labour team for this, it's going to be 250 hours. We are budgeting. The directors might say, no, that's too much. We can't allocate that. Or yes, we will. There's also a good idea to have a research and development budget. You know, what's this going to cost? What's the time frame for this expenditure? It needs to be reflected back into the budgets and cash flow forecasts, but not hidden away. I think the best idea is to create a new line, and we've got research and development project number 1. And the research and development budget's going to look at internal labour, any contracts, experts that have been employed, overseas expenditure, if claimable. And I'll come to that in a moment, and the total estimated cost. If there is a research and development manager, that person would normally review all this, sign off on it, so it goes to the board of directors. So there's a report then submitted to the board of directors. You can read about that in paper 052010. And as part of this submission could be some further information for the board of directors to consider. The company could apply for an advanced finding. Now, what that means is the company puts together a complete summary of what the proposal is, what it's going to cost to undertake, and how you're going to do it, where it's going to be conducted, the whole story. And that can get submitted to the tax office, and the tax office and Oz Industry jointly review that, and they decide whether they will issue an approval letter for that project to be undertaken. If you receive that approval letter, the expenditure on the balance of that financial year is covered by the approval letter, and the expenditure in the next 2 financial years are covered. Can't do this. Sorry, not with it today.